China wants companies in key sectors to make good on their foreign debt. The state planner and foreign exchange regulator has met several companies today as concerns grow about defaults in the country's massive property sector. Now, the regulators have asked the unnamed firms to optimize their foreign debt structures. And they've also demanded the companies proactively prepare for repayment of both principal and interest on their foreign bonds. Now, the move comes after yet another property developer missed a debt repayment. Modern Land failed to repay a $250 million bond that was due Monday. The developer had cautioned last week that it was likely to miss that deadline, and it blamed an unexpected cash crunch caused by factors including the macroeconomic environment, the real estate industry environment, and the pandemic. Now, Modern Land joins three other real estate developers that have defaulted amid a government clampdown on excessive leverage in the sector. And Evergrande, which narrowly averted a costly default last week, is reeling under more than $300 billion in liabilities and has a major payment deadline on Friday. Now, Chinese borrowers have reportedly defaulted on a record of nearly $9 billion of offshore bonds this year amid a slowdown in the sector that has rattled investors about growth in the entire economy.
The drop in real estate, particularly property sales, is likely to drag 4Q GDP, the new wave of COVID. So the economic growth, GDP growth in the fourth quarter, we suspect is going to be around 2%, right? So that's something that's, aside from the pandemic, it's basically the lowest since 1989.
Hello, Min Min joins us live now. Min Min, can companies like Evergrande and Modern Land, which have already missed payments, make the adjustments demanded when they're so stretched for cash?
Well, that's a really difficult question because the size of the debt is actually not quite transparent, and the numbers on their books don't quite tell the full story. Since Beijing started clamping down on corporate debt in 2017, many companies have turned to off-the-balance sheet vehicles to borrow money to escape regulatory scrutiny. And one common option, for example, is to go into joint ventures because as long as a company doesn't hold a controlling interest, they don't have to declare the amount of debt they acquire on the balance sheet. Other options include issuing private bonds through shell companies and other obscure financing channels that are difficult to track. In fact, one legal expert has said that nearly every real estate company in China has borrowings in disguise, and the problem is much worse than we can see. So it's hard to tell, but we know that many of these companies that are holding on to US dollar bonds are struggling to adapt to the twin crisis of a credit crunch and falling home sales. They are hit by this double whammy, essentially with regulators clamping down on the amount of debt they can hold, but also a reduction in mortgages issued to households, which is causing property sales to drop by a whopping 36% last month, traditionally a bumper month for property sales. So, and on top of that, a sell-off on Chinese junk bonds makes it almost impossible for any company to refinance their maturing debt by issuing new bonds at this point in time. We also know that the Chinese authorities recently told the billionaire founder of Evergrande to use his personal wealth to save his company. Now, that really shows that the government is keen not to orchestrate a government rescue at this time when they're heavily promoting their Common Prosperity campaign to reduce inequality. So what we know is that there will be more defaults and restructuring of debt by other companies in the coming weeks and months. The question is, who's next?
Well, Mimi, at the same time, China's conducting a property tax pilot plan to tame home prices. What is involved and why has it unnerved investors?
Well, the details of that is still quite sketchy at the moment, but experts are estimating the new tax rate to be at between 0.2 to 1%. But how it will be imposed, whether it's based on the number of homes that people own or the size of their houses, that's still not yet announced. But the reason why it's causing so much social media chatter here in China is because it affects nearly everyone. 70% of household wealth is tied to property, and that's because most people here in China, instead of saving their money in banks because of strict capital control and low interest rates, they tend to buy a house and hold them with the belief that housing prices will never fall and will only rise. But that could change now with the new property tax law. Property agents tell me that it would have a cooling effect on the entire market, and housing prices could even fall in some places. But that's also part of the government's intention. They've been wanting to tamp down runaway home prices and to increase affordability, make sure that those who really need the house can get one, and to reduce the financial burden for those that are already strained by rising medical and educational costs. And another thing I wanted to point out is one of the side effects of this, experts told me off the record, is it could tighten the shoestring of provincial governments who traditionally rely heavily on land sales as a source of revenue. These are land that they would seize from farmers and sell for a high price to developers to derive at least half of their revenue. So this new property tax law could reduce demand for land and possibly rebalance the power relations between provincial and central governments and reshape the entire structure of the Chinese economy by reducing their reliance on debt and real estate as an engine for growth.
Oh, thanks for that. Lo Min Min in Shanghai.